I think in the 1800s, mistranslated, in spite of the author not mentioning the word atom or particle. They had read that into it, and so all the translations refer to those things which were very Epicurean and atomistic, and those words didn't actually occur in the text itself. So that's going to be somewhat interesting. Then there's an article at Truthdig by Lee Camp from Redacted Tonight, who wrote, "I know which country the U.S. will invade next," and we all do. It's Iran. But then he tells you why. He says it's because they're getting rid of the petrodollar and they're going to start using their own thing, and he points to all these other countries the U.S. has invaded over the past however long, I guess 18 years now, and all of them have been invaded after they stopped using the dollar to buy petroleum, which is interesting because I believe the EU is now going to start buying petroleum with euro dollars instead of the American dollars. And I don't think the United States is going to invade the EU. I mean, I hope that our politicians have enough sense not to do something stupid like that. But, I hope they don't have, I hope they have enough sense not to do some other stupid things that they do too. So I don't know. Anyway, you guys better over there might want to start building some bomb shelters or something. I don't know. There's
I don't know.
Also an article here from USA Today. Let me see what this is. I think this was something about Bernie Sanders. If it will load. It's loading slowly, maybe.
He's fallen and can't get up?
No, I'll get back to it in a minute. Then there is a video I found by a guy called Sage Console. He had posted it in Mundane Matt's Discord, where I am also. And it's a speculation about how the Norse gods came to be what they are in the historical, poetic and prose Edda and stuff like that. So this one from USA Today says, Senator Bernie Sanders says this one issue keeps progressive policies from advancing. And it's by some Nicole Gaudiano, nice little Italian name there. And blah, blah, blah. He says, a singular roadblock to achieving success on a host of progressive policies is not the Trump administration, it's American oligarchy. Yeah, so he's going to be talking about 1% again, which again was the thing that the Occupy movement was concerned with. Now, I will remind you, I know Union Aerospace has heard me give this spiel many times, but the word progressive is a term that is used by at least 3 different groups in the United States, and they are very, very different. So don't think that when I say progressive in the sense of Bernie Sanders, I'm not talking about the regressives who call themselves progressives, the so-called social justice warriors, whom I call postmodernist and post-structuralist inspired outrage mongers. I got that term, by the way. I heard you using it, Union Aerospace. That's actually not my own term. That's a term I got from Nick Goroff, who is Wizard of Cause. And I had been thinking about using the term outrage warriors, which I had seen Liana Kersner use. And then I was talking about that with him, and he said he preferred the term outrage monger. And I thought, that really does sound a lot better. And it kind of, it's kind of like the whole hate monger, outrage monger. Yeah, it's perfect. It's not complete, but it's close enough. So I just tacked on that they are inspired by post-structuralism and postmodernism. But even still, it's still not complete. There needs to be something in there about victim playing, I think, because, they do that a lot, right? And so then there was a video from Jimmy Dore today called Iran Switches from the Dollar to the Euro, which again harkens back to the article by Lee Camp. And so then, so that looks like about the extent of what I had. Are any of those stories of interest to you guys? You want to talk about any of those things?
I mean, about the thing of Iran being invaded, well, I personally don't think the U.S. is that retarded to do it.
Oh, I can tell
I think
you.
we let the Russians.
I can tell you for sure that Iran is on the table. I mean, you got General Wesley Clark, who said this some time ago, that the United States was going to invade 7 countries in, I think it was 5 years, and Iran was one of them, so was Syria. But I can tell you that, okay, so I think I may have mentioned this before when you were in a Stream Union Aerospace, so if it's redundant to you, please bear with me. I don't know if Berserker is familiar with the information. So, like, I don't know if you know about the Project for a New American Century, PNAC. Have you heard of them? Berserker?
Very vaguely.
They were a neoconservative think tank. They were started sometime in the late 90s, I guess, and in September of 2000, they wrote a paper and published it in which they talked about how it would be a great idea to put an oil pipeline running from Iraq through Afghanistan into the Indian Ocean, you know, to a port, right, not into the ocean itself, but to a port on the Indian Ocean, in order to bypass OPEC, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and all that stuff, so the U.S. could get their petroleum from this oil pipeline coming out of Iraq. But of course, you know, that wasn't going to happen unless the U.S. went into Iraq and Iran and, you know, fucked around there. Which, as we know, did happen as a result of what happened a year later on the 11th of September 2001, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And, you know, I remember at the time, I woke up that morning, and I went into, oh my God, I went into a chat room on AOL. This is back in the days, right, when they still had chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo. It was a place that I used to hang out quite a bit. And the night before, we had been talking about how there was probably going to be a revolution or civil war in the United States sometime in the future. And I had said, I believe there is, and I do believe that it's a bad idea because the wrong people will start it. So, I mean, and I was thinking at the time about shit that had happened in the mid-90s with, like, the bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, right? So that's kind of what I had in mind, was kind of the white supremacist Aryan nations type people would probably try to start some kind of revolution or civil war. But so when I got up that morning, I didn't turn on television. I went and got on my computer and got online, and I went into this chat room, and everybody was freaking out, and the chat was just moving really fast, and I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And they said, turn on your computer. And I said, what channel? And they said, I'm sorry. They said, turn on your TV. And I said, what channel? And several of them at once said, any channel. So I went into the other room and turned on the TV, and yeah, sure enough, I was still standing there in somewhat of shock, thinking, well, I was right. This is the Civil War that I had been talking about the night before. And I didn't see the first plane, obviously. I don't think anyone get to see that live on television. But I was still standing there in front of the television when the second plane flew into the second tower. And I was like, oh, fucking shit, what's going on? You know, at this point, I was like, this is maybe a little more coordinated than I would think that the, you know, people like the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, and those kind of white supremacist groups from back in my university days would be able to accomplish. But, you know, I still kind of thought it might be that kind of white supremacist groups, you know, doing it. So, you know, nobody knew yet, and there was a lot of talk about how it was Muslims. The media was speculating that it was probably Muslims. There was also a lot of talk that it might have been, you know, something like Timothy McVeigh and that bunch doing their thing. So, you know, there was there was some support for my idea, I guess, basically, that it might be those guys doing it. So, you know, after I stood there in shock for a few minutes longer, I finally went back to the computer and went back into the chat room, and so I knew what people were talking about at that point. And so we all talked about it, and we were all kind of speculating and trying to figure out what was going on and stuff. Yeah, it was very interesting. But anyway, so as a result of that, we did go into Afghanistan and then into Iraq with no real justification. The media and the politicians were doing their damnedest to convince people that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, and I'm like, but he didn't. We all know he didn't. Okay, there's no... Those guys all came from Saudi Arabia, you know, according to the driver's licenses and or whatever it was they found. You know, they found people's wallets they claim were the terrorists, and they were all people from Saudi Arabia. Maybe one or two.
They were from Afghanistan.
One or two of them were from Afghanistan, but the rest of them were Saudi nationals. And so, at any rate...
They were Saudi nationals from Afghanistan, though, because they're people that were trusted by bin Laden.
Yeah,
like, he trusted them because they all kind of sort of fought the Russians at one
The Saudis
time.
were promoting... I mean, this is one of the things that I saw recently also in some news article, or might have been on a video, that intelligence veterans had told President Trump that Iran is not the #1 supporter or promoter of terrorism in the world. That's actually Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, yeah. But anyway, yeah, the thing that the PNAC had put forth in their paper was now possible, that we could go into Afghanistan and Iraq and fuck around there until we got a pipeline that we could bring out of Iraq, which has massive amount of oil reserves, down through Afghanistan to a port on the Indian Ocean, and thereby bypass OPEC. What is not as well known is that there were several members of the PNAC who got cabinet appointments in George W. Bush's administration. Okay, the PNAC went out of business. I mean, they disbanded or whatever, disestablished themselves. I don't know exactly